in a way, teaching always led to writing your books, and now teaching first is something that you would highly recommend?
Yeah, I think sometimes you already are doing it in your career, even if you're just teaching your team members. Like every programmer teaches because you're always coaching up junior programmers, for example. So every programmer is automatically a teacher. So their books tend to be more useful because, they've done it as part of their work. If you've never taught or you've never coached, I highly recommend spending a bit of time because it's way faster to iterate on a coaching conversation than to iterate on a 50,000 word manuscript or a 20,000 word manuscript or whatever. And if this feels scary, remember that you're not asking for a favor. You're asking to help people for free. You're saying basically like, hey, I think I understand this topic. If it matters to you, let me answer your questions and help you out. And if nobody wants to accept your free personal help, are they really going to want to read your book about it? And that doesn't mean you need to give up, but maybe you need to change the way you describe it, or maybe you need to write it for a slightly different reader segment. By using these early teaching conversations, you learn a lot. Not everyone does that. Arvid Kahl and Marty Kagan, they both use blogging as their equivalent. So they wrote the sections of their book kind of in public as blog posts. They built a mailing list. They were very accessible. They would have conversations with their subscribers and their readers. And they use that as their way to figure it out. Whereas I really like the teaching conversations, but do something. Like, don't start with a manuscript. That's crazy.
Do you think teaching at first helps with the curse of knowledge, or does it just make it a little bit more difficult to bring it down to the basics?
So a lot of professors write terrible books, even though they spend all day teaching. But what they're doing wrong, if you think back to university, it's one directional teaching. They're standing on stage and they're broadcasting, but they're never actually listening to where their students get confused. And if the students don't understand, they often blame the students and the students blame themselves. The etiquette in university is that if the students didn't understand, it's the student's fault. It's never the professor's fault. But when you're writing a book, it's always the author's fault. And so for teaching to be a good test, you need to be listening. So I actually prefer to teach one-on-one or in small groups. And then I follow up with people. It's like, hey, you seem confused. That's my fault. I must have explained it badly. Like, try to re-explain this to me. Let me see how you're thinking about it. There was a chess book called The Amateur's Mind. The whole way this book was written, chess books are traditionally very bad because it's a person who is a master explaining things from a master's perspective to beginners who aren't a master, and they can't understand it. And what he did is he basically played games with students, and at every move, he's like, tell me what you're thinking right now. Just talk through your thoughts. And he's like, wow, you completely misunderstand what's going on. But because he was listening to his students, this is the important thing. Teaching at its best is two directional. You're explaining, but you're also listening because you're trying to improve the way you teach. And this is what university professors get wrong. And this is why their books are so bad. It's like they're always talking and never listening. A book in particular exists as a standalone object in the free market. And if you have a beta reader or you're coaching someone and they don't get it, you can kind of notice and explain it to them. But when your book's out there in the market, you don't have that luxury anymore. Your book needs to stand on its own. You want to get your negative feedback during beta reading, not in your Amazon reviews. You want it ahead of time so that you can fix it pre-launch. And there's a common type of book where you read it and you go, I can tell the author is smart. And I can tell that the author knows what they're talking about, but the way they're explaining it, I can't benefit from that knowledge. And that's a death blow to a book because no one's going to recommend that book. Maybe you get a launch spike in your sales because of your reputation and your credentials, but you're not going to have a long-term growing asset. You're not going to have a long-term royalty stream. And so this humility of going into it, the mindset I take into writing a book is, I know I have a valuable idea to share, but I need to discover the right way to explain it, to frame it, to deliver it such that it sticks in the minds and can be applied in the lives of the readers who I'm trying to reach. And that's humble. Like, my first drafts are always wrong, hugely wrong. And no matter how many revisions I do by myself, it's still going to be wrong because it's going to be wrong, just more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so this is why so many of the reader conversations, the beta reading, it's like, help me figure out where you're confused. Help me figure out where, I sound smart, but you can't use it. Like, or I sound pretentious and you shut the book